Law and Government. Together here we have Councilman Green, the Vice Chair of the committee and the sponsor of the main sponsored resolution, also Councilman Jones and myself. Ms. Marconi, will you please read the title of the resolution before us today?
Bill number 160851, resolution authorizing the Council Committee on Law and Government to hold hearings regarding campaign finance reform and public financing of municipal elections.
Thank you. Will you please call the name of the first witness?
Ellen Kaplan.
And while Ms. Kaplan is approaching, just one general rule, I think I've talked to a few people in here about this. Ms. Kaplan, this really doesn't affect you because yours is pretty short. But those who have written testimony and have submitted it, it will be made part of the record. We just ask that people summarize their statements so we can keep moving, get into questions, and get into discussion. With that, Ms. Kaplan, please identify yourself and proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Greenlee, Councilman Jones, and Councilman Green. I'm Ellen Madelman Kaplan. I am the Chief Integrity Officer of the City of Philadelphia, and I am here with the Deputy Chief Integrity Officer, Stephanie Tipton. We have submitted written testimony, so I won't read it, but I do want to commend Councilman Green and Councilman Heenan for this resolution, and I'm very proud to live in a city that has a campaign finance ordinance, and City Council has taken a number of very important steps over the last few years to strengthen that campaign finance ordinance. But I think we can always use a conversation of how we can do the best possible job in administering and financing municipal elections. So I'm delighted to have this conversation here today, and also very pleased to see so many people who are coming from other cities that have enacted public financing programs so that we can hear best practices from them. On behalf of the Kenney administration, we're very interested in the conversation today and interested in being a part of any conversations with City Council, with the Board of Ethics, to talk about whether a public financing program would work for the City of Philadelphia. There are very strong reasons, which we'll hear today, in favor of public financing programs. At the same time, public financing programs don't come without a cost, and we're anxious to hear what that cost is going to be in terms of matching funds and administrative costs. And really, again, there's nothing more for me to say than we said in the testimony, and I know you folks like short testimony, so I'm happy to cede the floor to other people who know more about campaign financing, public financing, because they're on the ground floor of doing it in other cities. So thank you for the opportunity to testify here today.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kaplan. You're just here as a backup, is that?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Just one question. I know Councilman Green and Councilman Jones have a question. This is more of a comment and more just to steer the conversation as we go on. I know you mentioned, and you mentioned it in your verbal testimony, Ms. Kaplan, other projects competing for general fund dollars must be considered as well. And I think that's something that I'd like to hear from other people, because obviously the money available is not infinite, it's not a bottomless pit, and we go through every year in the budget process of competing good interests of trying to figure out how to provide money for worthy causes, worthy issues. And obviously this would add, at least in some way, a significant addition to those considerations. So I don't know if you have any comment on that, or I just throw that out there so for other people that are listening or maybe listening in the future, if that could be melded into the conversation, I'd like to hear what some of these other cities did. So I don't know if you have anything on that, or, okay, very good. Councilman Green?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was actually some of the commentary I was going to raise. A few years ago, when Councilman Tasker was a member of this body and chair of the Finance Committee, we had hearings regarding the concept of public financing of elections. At that time, Arizona was kind of the leading state in the country regarding public financing of elections. And so the biggest challenge was, how do we come up with a system of doing so, and how do we find a way to provide this as an opportunity possibly going forward. And when you look at the number of challenges we have as a city, and where the general fund is already stretched, as Councilman Greenlee stated, we have this amount of needs and this amount of resources. So I'm curious, I know, Ms. Kaplan, you've been not only with the city administration for a short period of time, but also with Committee 70. So I'm curious from your perspective, any thoughts you may have, not necessarily speaking on behalf of the administration, just any thoughts you may have on ideas from a funding source, either you or Ms. Tipton, regarding this idea based on your conversations or insights from other cities or jurisdictions.
I'm going to ask my colleague to translate. I have hearing issues, and I must tell you that city council chambers are really not friendly to people that have hearing issues. So
We just asked what our thoughts were on the funding from other jurisdictions and how we might fund something like this. How we might fund something like this.
thank you.
Yeah.
There are a number of options for funding something like this, and the question is, does it come from the general fund dollars, and also how do taxpayers feel about that? There are other thoughts that I have seen from other jurisdictions that it could be raised from fees on lobbyists. Now, as you all know, the Board of Ethics, which administers and enforces the campaign finance ordinance, does charge $100 at the moment in lobbyist fees, but Philadelphia doesn't have that many lobbyists as compared to certainly other cities, and the money generated from lobbyist fees I don't think would go a very long way in supporting a campaign finance program. And there also maybe perhaps, and again, I know Michael Cook is going to be testifying from the Board of Ethics today, fees that could come in for violations of the campaign finance ordinance. So I think it would be, this is going to be a question that City Council members, if they're interested in pursuing this program, and again, the county administration fully supports continued exploration of a public financing program to see where the money would come from, and also how we're going to be talking about a public financing program to the voters if the money's coming out of the general fund.
Yeah, because I think that, that's kind of really the challenge. How do we find a way to pay for this concept? I think part of the motivation of continuing this dialogue that Councilman Tasker started is that if you look at our elections, there are a number of factors of why we have smaller turnout participation. I would say public financing is one aspect of that. There are other issues in reference to civic engagement. If you look at the 2015 election, we had about 26% turnout. When we did this resolution a few years ago, the turnout was about the same number. So there's a significant barrier of entry into the political process for those who are interested in being engaged as a person to run for office, especially when you look at the impact we have in reference to lack of participation for women and also people of color who are elected officials, not as much at the local level, but definitely at the state level. So I think this is an opportunity to continue the conversation, but the biggest crux of the issue is how do we pay for it? And I've been a proponent that if we're going to come up with some type of system, it needs to be something that's not going to take away from the general fund, but a system that we're going to provide dollars to help those who may be interested in running for office to reduce the high costs and the money that comes into elections. And you've seen from the Post-Citizens United and other type of cases, the amount of money that comes into our electoral process and going through electoral process as we currently are right now, huge amounts of money that are coming into the system, and how do we lower that barrier of entry so more people can be engaged in the process?
I think, just to your point, though, I think that there are a great many benefits to a public financing program, and I certainly don't mean my mention of finances here as in any way to put a damper on the conversation, because I do think public financing systems in other cities have proven to be an entree to the political process for many people who today feel that they are not part of that process. So I think these are all really important issues to talk about when we sit down and really drill down on the details of a public financing program.
If we were able to come up with a system of funding, would you be supportive of a system where people could opt out of the system, where X amount of dollars were provided for candidates, but those who decided to self-fund could opt out of that system?
As I understand public financing programs, nobody can be forced to participate in a public financing program. That candidates do have the ability to opt out if they choose to do so. So is there always a possibility of a tremendously wealthy candidate not accepting public financing? And the answer to that is yes. What I found very fascinating is in the 27 election for mayor, there was a very wealthy candidate. Of course, that was not a public financing system, but we had a situation where a very wealthy candidate participated in that election, and he was not the winning candidate. So I think that the fact that somebody might opt out, I don't think is necessarily means that that person would win the election, because we have that experience here in Philadelphia where it didn't turn out.
And one final question, 'cause I know my colleagues would like to ask some questions. What's your thoughts on the role of media in raising the costs of people running for office, especially when you're looking at citywide? And it's kind of a catch-22, because the business side of some media interests tend to increase rates during the time as you get closer to an election, which benefits the entity, but then you have on the editorial side and more of the news side who are concerned about the amount of money going into the political process. So what do you think the role of media has in reference to the cost impact in people running for office?
Would increase the cost of elections? The role of the media increasing the cost of elections. The role of the media in increasing it?
That's an interesting question, Councilman. I'd like to think about that. I guess it depends on the election, the role of the media. Certainly, I think in recent years, that question tends to be more relevant actually in the primary season, especially when there is an open mayor's seat, and perhaps in a number of council races in the past. But in light of everything that we have seen over the last year on the federal front, I'd have to think about that some more, and wondering actually how that will play out in local elections. The intense glare of the media.
Right. I mean, I think that's part of the challenge. I think when someone is running for an office, especially a citywide or a statewide office, the easiest way to get to a voter is through the media. I'm not saying it's the best way, but that's the quickest and easiest way, which is the cost. And then I think that's part of the challenge, and that's part of this conversation, that there is a significant aspect that the role of media has in reference to the cost of communicating with the general public regarding issues and concepts and ideas is a part of this concern. I think part of what has raised the cost of people running for office, and I think there needs to be a role for media in this conversation. Now, granted, there's media in the First Amendment, other type of dynamics, but I think there is an aspect to this issue that the media has a role to play as well.
You just said the media needs to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah. Oh, I apologize that I have hearing issue. Yes, and yes, I agree with you. The media should be a part of this conversation, because they certainly do play a role, and in some cases, arguably, do drive up the costs of election. I'd like to just mention something, because I heard you mention statewide elections. It is continually a disappointment that there is no campaign finance law for statewide elections. And again, Philadelphia has really been a model for other cities in the Commonwealth. Not that they have all taken up that mantle, but I think the city of Philadelphia really has been very, very strong on campaign finance reform. And while we're exploring this conversation on publicly financed campaigns, I hope we will continue to work together to strengthen the campaign finance law in any way that we can.
Actually, that actually raises another point. What would be the impact if the city were able to come up, assuming arguendo were able to resolve the financing issue, but if the city were to come up with a public financing of campaigns, what impact do you think the state would have in that issue, considering that there's no campaign finance dynamic like you just discussed a few moments ago at the state level, but if we were to come up with a public financing system, how do you think that would impact our city-state relationship?
Thank you, Councilman. Please let the record reflect Councilman Heenan, a member of the committee, is present. Councilman Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does it impact? I would hope that it would impact in a very positive way, but unfortunately that has not happened yet. I know that there are proposals continually in Harrisburg to have a campaign finance law with caps on contributions, but they seem to die before they get a committee hearing. So I would hope that we would have a positive impact at some point in state government in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Jones?
Thank you so much, and good morning.
Good morning.
So I have a high degree of regard for agencies like yours and the Committee of 70 and others that give us balance, keep us from being demagogues and tyrannical and all of those good things, because sitting in those chairs, if you only hear the echo of your own voice, you tend to get tone deaf to what reason comes from the outside of your own head. So I respect that totally, and I've been on the bad side of you guys before, and I've forgiven and learned from it. Experience is the best teacher sometimes through pain, and so you tend to get it. So I'm okay with all of this. What I want you to also and always share with you guys is how it is for our voices over here who actually have to run for office, who actually have to present themselves to the public, have full transparency in everything that we go through. So for me, not speaking for anyone else on this committee, I ran for my first office in 1979. No, actually 76, delegate to the Democratic National Convention. I was a young, idealistic guy, high school guy, and ran and got my rear end handed to me. Didn't win, but I got involved, and I really learned a lot and became addicted to this thing called government, politics, and progress in public policy. So I want you to know, the bad term is he's a lifetime government guy. Well, I wear that proudly, and hopefully over the time I'm here, we'll be able to point to things where I've made a difference. And that's my goal, and that's not to get rich, not to do anything, but to make a difference. And that's why I started, and that's why I do it today. That passion led to me eventually contributing in other ways in government, but then in 2007, having to do a gut check. And when I mean a gut check, when you take that leap of faith to say, I'm going to get naked before the Romans, I'm going to raise money, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to stand and listen to the hecklers to get pointed in your face and accused of all kinds of things. That is a gut check. Another gut check is when in 2007 I took $60,000+ out of my 401k, having worked for 14 years, and said, I believe in myself, being a value added to government enough to risk my family's future for it. And, you know, win, lose, or draw, right? When you do those kinds of things, that's when you know that you are committed to this thing here. When your family, not so much with me, I'm a swashbuckler kind of guy, but when I'm risking my kids' tuition and I'm risking my mortgage payment, that is a commitment. That is like the chicken and the ham. It's not, you know, the chicken makes a contribution, the ham is committed. Because he's, you know, I won't go into the joke, but it is real. So I put up my own money to do this. There are unintended consequences to public finance. There are people, and I am not qualified to question anyone's motivation that runs for office. But some of them have been professional candidates that I get into it so I can make a deal with the incumbent. Anybody who hasn't heard of that, raise your hand. But they get into the race, they go hold it down. They get into the race to go to the incumbent and say, you can deal me out of this if you give me X, Y, and maybe even Z. And some people do it. Some people say, bring what you're bringing, and I'll see you on the campaign field. But there are those kinds of people that are motivated not so much for the public interest, and I'm not trying to say I'm pure or anything like that, but I've been in this enough to know this is what I am committed to do. But there are some people that, you know, this is an opportunity for a raise, a promotion, a great job, and you see that by the heads, there are those people. If you add the added incentive of public finance, if I could raise this money to this degree, and then I'm gonna get a match, and then I can do this and that, I don't know if that's the kind of commitment that we are looking for. Let me further say.
Well, Councilman...
No, wait a minute, I wasn't done.
Oh, okay.
I listen. I just want to get mine out, because I'm at the age now, because all of that I'll lose my thought. So, in 2000, was it 7? How many candidates were ran for at large? About 50?
2007.
Huh? About 50.
Not by 50.
There might have been,
5 and drop.
5 and drop out.
91 was the big year.
So 91, how many ran?
Like 100.
100. And let me give you the process so that you know our side of the thinking. They go into the lottery ball lotto, literally, whether you're a judge. Am I right? Don't act like I'm not telling the truth here, right? Yeah. So they go into the lottery ball lotto. And if I pull number 1, am I right, Wilson? Good? If I pull number 10, I'm out. If I pull number 20, I'm definitely out. And they go into that. I remember being in the room when you pulled number 1 and walked out of that place like on a cloud, right? Because that meant so much by way of winnability. Not anyone's motivation, but their ability to run as a successful candidate. And not to say that that hasn't worked out for the betterment of this body, but I don't want that to be your motivation to run for office, that if I win the lotto, I can be an elected official. And then, when they got the bad news of the balls, they dropped out. So that process in and of itself, and everybody has a right to run. From people who aren't sincere to people who are. But in that process, you better pray and hope that the folk that wind up here actually want to do something for this city. And so I'm not convinced, and I want to hear, and I still have an open mind. I voted for things I wasn't sure of before, and giving it the benefit of the doubt. But help me to understand how that does not encourage that professional candidate to be in this business.
I think that you have raised a number of issues, I think, that are really central to how a public financing system would be structured in the city of Philadelphia. And I think the people who are here today from other cities who have already instituted those programs should be able to talk to you about how your points have played out in the city, in their individual cities. In public financing systems, there is a qualifying amount, a threshold amount that candidates do have to raise before they are eligible for matching funds, with the idea that you really do want to weed out candidates who are not serious, candidates who are just doing that to get publicity for other reasons. And so again, I think their experience will be really instructive in terms of how many candidates may have said they were throwing their hat in the ring and how many actually qualified for the public financing.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, but I, certainly, you raise a good point that many candidates in Philadelphia who are very serious do make a lot of personal sacrifices in order to run for office.
So I'll leave you with this. There were approximately 15 or so Republican candidates for president in the primary, right? Originally. Through vetting and through, who could get this. And it's a process that our founding fathers put together.
Right.
We are now 1 week away from the possibility of one of those candidates who, no matter where you sit, we're nonpartisan here. It's funny, and entertaining, I might add, when jokes are told and you laugh. It is not entertaining when a joke gets elected and has the keys to the Treasury and to public policy, because all of our children depend on making grown-up decisions. So this is a solemn process that I know all of these folk up here have gone through, and we came from different parts of town and different constituencies, but I do not doubt, not one person on this panel's sincere interest in this city. I don't want it left up to a lottery, or if I get lucky and get this matching money, I want you to look in the mirror and think real hard about your decision to enter this arena. And it's not that I'm afraid of competition, because if they outwork me, then they deserve this spot. But keep up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything? Councilman Green?
Yeah, just to follow up on Councilman Jones' comments, and I appreciate his comments because he talked in a very eloquent way about the challenges in coming up with a public finance system. As an attorney, I know people, not necessarily in this city, but in another part of the Commonwealth, that run for judge as their business development strategy. They file their petition only to get notoriety so that way they can get more clients. But then you have the other end of the spectrum, which Councilman Jones talked about, where you have someone that has infinite amount of resources at their disposal, and they decide that, well, I'm going to pick up being a public servant as a hobby. And since we're in the November now, so we're in baseball season, so I'm thinking about baseball. So I think of a team that I despise greatly, which is the Yankees. They have unlimited amount of resources, and they can decide, they can buy off or pick off players. I'm assuming they're looking at both the Cubs and the Indians in a way that 2 or 3 years, I think I'm going to take that player or that player. But if you look at baseball, it has a way of balancing things. And so you have small market teams like the Kansas City Royals who will be able to win. And I think that's part of what I look at this process. How do we make the process fair so you don't have someone that just jumps in for the sake of jumping in a race and I want to do it just for whatever, versus someone that decides, oh, I'm going to decide I want to run the city of Philadelphia, or I want to do whatever, and just decides to use this as a hobby. And I think by having this conversation about public financing, it allows those Oakland A's type teams or candidates who have a real interest and real commitment to their communities and have really great ideas to offer the city, but because if they decide to run, they don't have the connections or the resources, or don't have the ability to devote 7-8 months out of the year to do call time every day, and even if they had the time to do call time, don't have the relations with people that can help them raise money to really raise the money to do a citywide race or even a district race. So I think that the challenge is how do we balance those different concepts. And I think that was kind of the purpose of the initial conversation we had with Councilman Tasker, and as it continues today.
Councilman, I'd still like to believe that if there are voters that do get matching funds that don't articulate policy positions and don't connect to their communities, will be weeded out through the democratic process.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you both very much. Thank you. Good start to the discussion here. Ms. Marconi, please, our next panel.
Katie, Kelly, and Brent Ferguson.
Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Morning.
I think we talked about this earlier. Your written testimony is being made part of the record, so if you could you see kind of the discussion where it's going, so maybe you can address some of your remarks to some of the issues that have been brought up already. Whoever would like to go first?
Sure.
Kelly, please identify yourself and proceed.
Yes, my name is Katie Kelly. I'm here on behalf.
A little closer to the microphone. Ms. Kaplan's absolutely right. This is a beautiful room, and you can't hear in it. So you need to speak directly in and as loud as you can.
All right, is that better?
There you go.
Okay. Yes, my name is Katie Kelly. I'm here on behalf of the Campaign Legal Center. I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss the importance of public financing as an option for campaign finance reform for the city of Philadelphia. We think that the city has undertaken this consideration at a very important time for the city and for our democracy. As has already been discussed, we are less than a week away from an election and the conclusion of a very long presidential race. In total, it's estimated that $6.6 billion will be spent on this election, and that's a significant increase even from 2012, which shattered the records of the most expensive election in our history. Much of the coverage this election is focused on how much money has been raised in support of each candidate and who they're raising their money from. Perhaps the most startling aspect of the $6.6 billion is the amount coming from a small handful of the wealthiest Americans. Nearly 12% of all the money raised so far comes from just 100 families. This means that the vast majority of Americans are not participating in the financing of our campaigns. Public funding offers an alternative. It elevates the voices of all citizens in our political process, not just those who are able to write large checks. We think that public financing has the opportunity to reorient our elections by facilitating the dialogue between voters and elected officials and to increase participation in the electoral process. My testimony also addresses some background history on public financing and the constitutionality of these programs. I'm happy to address specific questions that the committee has on those issues, but for the remainder of my oral remarks, I'd just like to highlight some elements that we think are key components of any public financing system. There's been questions about how to weed out candidates who aren't serious. A good public financing program, you have to qualify for it, and it's, different programs address this in different ways. You need to get a certain number of small dollar contributions from residents of your district, because we really want to be able to, the candidate has to prove that they have the support of the people that they're going to represent. And that way, between the qualifying funds and the course of the democratic process through a campaign, you'll winnow the field of candidates to the ones that are really viable for office and have the support of the electorate. We also think that lower limits on contributions to those who are participating as publicly financed candidates is important. The lower limits creates more, or breaks the importance of large contributions to candidates, and the lower limits for the candidates is offset by the public funds the candidate receives. We think there should be a prohibition on participating candidates listing soft money or unregulated campaign contributions, whether for a super PAC or some other entity that might be supporting them. This has potential for seriously undermining your public financing program. We think there should be limits on how the public funds can be spent. We have seen programs face trouble when it comes to light that the funds have been used to benefit the candidate in a personal capacity. And this ties into really the key component of getting your public financing program to work, and that's good administration and good enforcement. You need somebody there making sure the funds are used appropriately, and you need an administrator with the resources and the authority to do their job. And finally, these systems require maintenance. The presidential public financing system was successful for many years. It hasn't been updated since 1974. And guess what? Campaigns have changed since then, and the system is now horribly out of date. New York City is the successful counterpoint to that, and the New York City Campaign Finance Board is charged with reviewing the system and suggesting updates, and so that system actually has received the maintenance it needs to maintain the longevity of the program. That covers my what I'd like to address to the committee, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kelly. Let's hear from Mr. Ferguson, and we'll go from there.
Sure.
Okay.
My name is Brent Ferguson from the Brennan Center for Justice. First, I'll second Katie's remarks. I think the public financing programs that you're considering most seriously, probably a matching program like New York City's, or a voucher program, which is just being tried for the first time in Seattle next year. I think they will address the concerns that you've raised earlier about serious candidates, and candidates will be weeded out by the threshold of small contributions they have to get at the beginning of the process. And it also does something different than Arizona's system, which provides a big block grant. It means that throughout the election process, candidates have to keep raising money and keep meeting voters and asking for that money to get a voucher or to get a small contribution that's matched. If they're not a serious candidate, they're not going to get those small contributions from voters, and I think that's a very important part of this system. I've been asked to explain voucher systems in a little bit more detail, which I'll do quickly. It's also in my written testimony, but I want to emphasize the promising nature of the system. As I said, we don't have any voucher programs in the United States yet. Seattle just adopted a system that will first be implemented next year. The way that it works is every registered voter gets 4 $25 vouchers, which they can then give to any candidate for city office. They have to comply with low contribution limits of about $250 or $500, depending on the office. They also have to abide by spending limits of between $150,000 and $800,000 per election. And they have to raise those qualifying contributions that we talked about, up to 600 contributions for a candidate for mayor. So the reason that this has such potential for Seattle and for other cities like Philadelphia is that it can really get more people involved in the process. We've never had a system in this country that gives essentially a gift card to every voter across the city and says, you give this free money to any candidate that you want to support. Even the matching program in New York City, you have to take some money out of your pocket, and that means that wealthier people are going to disproportionately give money. The matching system has certainly been successful in encouraging donor diversity from different neighborhoods and different levels of wealth across the city, but voucher programs have the potential to do that to an even greater degree. I will say there are a few drawbacks to a voucher program. It's somewhat of an experiment. We don't have any voucher system in place, so the logistics may be a little bit difficult. Getting vouchers to everyone successfully, making sure that they're not sent to the wrong address, making sure that people aren't coerced into using their vouchers, making sure that they're not subject to fraud and people are collecting vouchers and submitting them fraudulently. And then finally, generally outside the voucher program, I want to emphasize a couple points that have been made. The funding, as you've discussed before, is very important. The amount of money required for a public financing system is relatively small, but it must be guaranteed. We've seen other places like Massachusetts and Suffolk County where they adopt a program like this, and if they don't have money backed up by the general fund, the system can fail very quickly, and it's not worth passing if it's not a system that a candidate can be sure they can have confidence in and get the money that they signed up for. And then the enforcement and administration of the system are important as well. We have to make a flexible system with an agency that's empowered to make small changes when necessary. And finally, a system needs to take into account the fact that outside money is growing across the country through entities like super PACs. As was mentioned before, these systems must be voluntary, so some privately financed candidates may be able to spend big money even if in a successful system. Super PACs can spend unlimited amounts of money. It's important to take into account the amounts of money that are being spent in Philadelphia and that might be spent in the future, and to allow candidates to raise enough money to compete with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Let me just ask, Mr. Ferguson, you brought up Seattle, and I know we're going to hear from somebody from Seattle, but it says the city will distribute 4 $25 vouchers. Sounds like a lot of money it adds up to. And obviously, we're a larger city, so I guess, and again, we're going to hear from somebody from Seattle,
Sure.
so maybe
Yeah,
the question is better to them.
I
But
can
I don't
answer
know, how did the general public react to that? I mean,
Well, the general public was very much in favor. They voted, I don't remember the exact percentage, but I think it passed with almost 60% approval.
Really?
There's a couple ways to limit the spending of a program like this. Any program, a voucher program or a matching program, can simply limit the amount of funds spent, even if that's less than the amount of vouchers that are given. So that's what Seattle did. If every voter used their vouchers, it would go over that limit, so the final vouchers wouldn't count. They essentially wouldn't be worth anything. You could consider that some problem, but at the same time, it guarantees that the city's not going to be in a huge hole. Seattle gave $3 million over 10 years for this program, and it's a small property tax increase that pays for that. So it's not
property tax increase.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. People always push for that here in the city of Philadelphia, those property tax increases. I have to say, when we want to fund schools, and I'm not being critical, I'm just pointing something out. When we want to fund schools and talk about property tax increases, people bring out the pitchforks. So,
yeah, I'm not recommending that as a method for Philadelphia.
I'm just saying I think that gets back to what I brought up earlier, that we have to figure out how we balance all the money that we need and don't have.
Certainly, and there are publications and a lot of ideas for different cities on how to create that funding, but I would just emphasize that whatever is most appropriate for Philadelphia should be backed up by the general fund.
Okay. And just one last thing, and turn to the rest of the panel. In your written testimony, you talk about important considerations, and you talk about how to ensure that participating candidates are not overwhelmed by high levels of spending by non-participating opponents and groups like PACs. I mean, you can limit, and we do have campaign limits here in Philadelphia, but we can't limit what an individual spends, right?
Certainly.
So
So what that consideration means is, as you say, outside groups and candidates can spend as much as they want. So under matching programs or voucher systems, there's a limited amount of money most candidates can raise. They can raise a certain amount of money and then the public funds are spent. Systems like Seattle's raise that limit in the cases in which candidates face high spending opponents. So if I'm a publicly financed candidate and I'm facing someone who gets a lot of money from the outside, then my limits are raised. And that helps ensure that candidates can go into the program and know that they're not going to be outspent to such a great degree.
Yeah, we have something similar. If a person, I don't know the figures here off the top of my head, but if a person self-finances to a certain level, then the limits that we can
the contribution limits go up.
Contribution,
This is a little bit of a different idea, but same.
The millionaire clause,
Right.
Yeah, right. So, okay, thank you. Councilman Green, then Councilman Heaton.
Thank you both for your testimony. In looking at the various localities that have public financing from, and I'm looking primarily at Miami-Dade County, Seattle, which you talked about, and also we've been talking about New York and LA. In all of those public financing systems, those dollars came from the general fund, correct?
The Seattle system is a property tax
property
increase.
tax. Sorry, you did say property tax, right?
I don't know about Miami. Do you know?
I don't off the top of my head.
Okay.
Most of the systems at least are backed up by the general fund, and so if there's a shortfall in something like the property tax increase, then they can add a little bit of money. But
yeah, a lot of the systems operate from a designated fund, and then, as Brent said, backed up by the general fund.
The reason I'm just reflecting on a couple different ideas. So if you look at from the President's campaign 2008, as well as the Sanders campaign of this year, as well as also the Trump campaign in the past couple months, they've been able to raise small dollars by specific events that may have occurred and using small dollar online donations. Has there been any thought, and I'm thinking about, like, for example, when you file your federal tax returns, you can mark off $3 to the Presidential Commission. I know in Delaware, for their estate taxes, they do the same thing. We can mark off or designate dollars. Have there been any conversations of ways municipalities, either on their own or working with another organization, could try to raise funds in an online way to try to get money into a public financing system by voters? For example, having a drive or a fund drive over a period of time to kind of raise some dollars to help seed a public financing concept. Has there been any ideas of other jurisdictions doing that, trying to find another way of, for those people who are really interested in participating and trying to raise the money outside just going to the general fund?
I'm not aware of any efforts like that off the top of my head. Most of the public financing programs, though, it's allowed that they can accept contributions from people who just want to give to, generally support the public financing of campaigns. So a lot of these programs do include some sort of provision allowing for that sort of, individual financing of the public funding campaigns.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know of any specific effort, but yeah, most laws say that voluntary contributions are accepted. It's certainly never the case that that's enough to fund the program. There are also tax checkoffs, like you mentioned, both in the federal program, and I believe some state programs have it. I think that's a viable way to create some funding, although, again, I don't think that's going to provide enough money for the whole system.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Heenan?
Thank you. Thank you for coming here and testifying. Just on the same line of the councilman's questions on funding, can you explain a little more in detail the different options, such as the trust, dedicated taxes, the general funds, and the opt-in, opt-out tax collection? Is that correct? Or tax collection credit?
Sure. I can talk about that a little bit. I'll say, and Katie, feel free to jump in. It's hard to talk about the funding issues in that much specificity in a jurisdiction like Philadelphia, where I don't know it intimately. The different cities and states make different choices based on where they think they can raise the most money. And so there's a long list of ideas that various states and cities have used. A tax checkoff is one thing that's been used for decades in the federal presidential public financing system. And for a couple of decades, it worked somewhat well and people participated in it, provided quite a lot of money, although the popularity went down after a while. And because if there's not a backup or another source of funding, that creates a real problem. You see other states propose fees on lobbying or campaign finance filing. You see states consider taking money from an abandoned property fund. I don't know if there's something like that in Philadelphia, but it was in a recent New York State bill. So it really, and then the property taxes, as we discussed in Seattle. I think it's a concern that's specific to Philadelphia, but we're happy to provide a list of methods that states and cities have used in the past, if that would be helpful.
Catherine, you had mentioned about 1974, the maintenance of the systems. So how often are the processes and systems, revisited? I mean, you had given a date from 1974 in one particular case. How, in best practice, best case scenario, how often do you think we should be revisiting if this were to be implemented somewhere?
Yeah, I think New York City really is the best model to look to for that. The New York City Campaign Finance Board is required to hold hearings after each election to seek input from office holders, from public interest groups, from citizens, from campaign practitioners, and get input. And, it's a chance for the community to say, hey, this really didn't work in the system this year. We think you should change this. And so they're required to do it after each election. And I think that is a good approach. I think that's the right approach because campaigns change a lot, as we've seen over the past 6 years. The way money is spent, the way money is raised changes a lot. And these systems need to be tweaked and fine-tuned in order to respond to those changes and give the candidates the support they need to make public financing viable.
So from either one of you, in your experience and expertise on, the knowledge of public financing across the country, for a city or state to get started, right from a clean slate, what are some of the challenges that they would experience?
We've already discussed funding, which is certainly one. I think that the enforcement and administration of a public financing system is extremely important, and many cities and states consider setting up a new agency that's dedicated specifically to running the program. Whether it's a matching program or a voucher program, it takes expertise and flexibility to review candidate reports and maintain the system well and update the system, as Katie mentioned, and also adjudicate problems and hear candidate complaints and respond to those. I think a third major concern is looking specifically at where the big money in the city is coming from. If one of the goals of the public financing program is to reduce reliance on the bigger contributions, is the money mainly coming from contributions? Is super PAC spending rising? And how can you create a system that will attract candidates, but also meet the goals of the system? So that's where you have to consider how high you want the contribution limits to be for participating candidates. Some cities like New York allow their participating candidates to raise the same size of contributions as non-participating. Some make them abide by lower contribution limits. So finding that balance and responding to the spending is important.
You had mentioned, this will be my last question, you had mentioned that lack of participation, there was a drop-off in, in with the voters. What do you think contributed to that drop-off? Because we, and it may not just be the city of Philadelphia, it may be nationwide. We suffer from electile dysfunction here in the city. We try to encourage people to come out and vote, but there seems to be a lack of enthusiasm for whatever reason. How would you keep people engaged in the process?
Sure.
and participate in the program?
Sure. I think drop-off in participation is a problem with both candidates and with voters. And so when candidates stop participating in the system, it becomes a real problem. And we saw that in Arizona, which has a block grant system that was weakened by the Supreme Court in 2011. And after that, fewer candidates participated. That system had been really successful in making people believe that big money didn't matter. And I think the advantage of a matching program or a voucher program is that to get good public funding, a candidate must go out and meet small donors, hold rallies, go door to door, and that does two things. It allows them to rely on small donations when they run and listen to the voices of more citizens, and it also means that the citizens are getting that contact with a candidate that's not necessarily going to happen if all of the ads are run on TV, which is the case more often if you're raising large contributions. So I think that public financing by those two methods is really powerful.
Okay, thank you. I have no further question.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Green?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Are there any, from your experience in other jurisdictions around the country, are there any fees that are part of the political process that would be, could possibly be used to help fund a public financing system? Either filing fees or other type of fees you've seen in other jurisdictions that could possibly be used as another way of helping to augment the costs of funds from the general fund to help pay for a public financing system?
Do you know?
Well, in a lot of the systems, if a candidate or committee, whoever, is fined for violating the campaign finance laws, the fine collected will go back into the public fund system, so that's pretty common practice. And then I think Brent already mentioned that sometimes lobbying registration fees or other types of fines and fees that might be collected by the campaign finance agency could go into supporting the public financing.
Right. And I've certainly seen proposals that PAC registration fees and things like that would be used to fund the system. I don't know that that's ever successfully been implemented. And again, I would caution that I don't think you'd be able to provide, a majority of the funding for a program through that, but it could contribute, and you can certainly look at multiple sources to do things like that.
Right, and that's kind of, listening to what you're saying, it may be requesting contributions from the public at large, filing fees, fines. I'm just looking at amalgamation of ideas to try to come up with that source as an idea.
Yeah, certainly. I think going with multiple sources is a good idea, and having a budget analyst figure out how much that can produce, and then perhaps modeling the system, with that reality in mind is a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman, maybe I can answer a question of you, if I'm right. Don't we have a limit on what we can, if it's a fee, isn't the money, we have to justify the money going into the administration of the program? Can we give it to something else? Or, am I making sense?
Well, I think this would, as opposed to, my thought would be if there was some type of additional fee or existing fee, it would be part of our public financing system. So it would be paying for the same source.
So we'll go into the,
Right, so I'm often trying to think of if we're going to take on a new cost, have a way of paying for that cost based on the type of service we're trying to provide, as opposed to just taking money out of general fund because we don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you both very much. I appreciate your time and your expertise. All right, Ms. Marconi, if you want to call the next names, and I understand they're going to be visiting us in varying ways. So.
Leanne Pelham, Amy Loprest, and Wayne Barnett.
All right. Are all of them on Skype or somebody on a phone? Or? 2 on Skype and 1 on phone. See, this is a real challenger for me, folks, because I'm still texting, I'm still learning to do that. This is San Francisco. Hello, Ms. Pelham. How are you? Oh, good. You can hear us well. Okay. I guess we can just have one at a time. Is that the way we're doing it? Okay. All right. So, Ms. Pelham, I understand you're going to give a kind of a brief statement and then be available for questions. Is that the way we can handle it here? And just to frame where a lot of where our conversations were going, if you wanted to fit that in, it has to do with, I guess a lot of it is how do we fund this? How would we fund a program? So maybe you can talk about San Francisco and how you did it, and maybe what the reactions have been to, from the public and whatever. So please, proceed. If you could just officially say your name for the record.
Great, thank you. My name is Leanne Pelham. I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Ethics Commission, and I've been here since January, so I have some...
Could you hold on 1 second? Just 1 second. We're having a little trouble hearing in here, okay, for the stenographer because she has to record everything here. So hold on 1 second, please.
Got it.
Okay. Modern technology here. All right, Ms. Pelham, could you just say something to see if you're clear
Sure,
now?
good morning.
Okay, that's better.
North, south.
Go. I think we're good now. Proceed, please.
Okay, thanks. There will be a bit of an echo, but that doesn't cause any issues.
Well, now we're getting an echo. Maybe we can lower it just a little bit and see if we can find a middle ground here.
Is this any better?
Hold on 1 second, Ms. Pelham. Go ahead. All right, try it again.
Is this a better volume?
Okay, I think we're okay. All right.
Okay.
It's a little challenging, but we'll deal with it. Please
Great.
proceed again. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No worries. This The San Francisco program, from the information we've provided, you may recall it was created by the voters in San Francisco back in 2000, and it was first implemented with the city's Board of Supervisors elections in 2002. There are 11 districts, supervisorial districts in the city, and then the mayoral race was added in 2006. But the city's experience has been much more with the supervisorial races than with the mayor's race. So that's the base of data that we've got to date is primarily about Board of Supervisor races. But the voters created the system in 2000. It was adopted by San Francisco voters. It changed our charter. It added a series of program requirements. The funding for the program came from a formula based on $2.75 per resident into an election trust fund. And that fund can only be used to pay for public financing for candidates who qualify for the program based on the program's criteria. It's a maximum of $7 million that can be in the fund at any one time, and it is funded by the city's general fund. My understanding has been that it's been funded every year that it's needed to be up to the appropriate allocation to make sure that whatever the formula requires to be deposited up to that $7 million has been deposited, and that those funds have always been used exclusively for the matching funds program. There may have been one time, as I understand it, that the program, the city borrowed money from the trust fund, but then it paid it back very shortly thereafter. I'm not sure of the circumstances. We can follow up if that's of interest to you. But that's the general basis for where the money comes from. It's from the taxpayers directly. And it's approved as part of the regular budget process, but it is a mandatory allocation that's required based on the charter requirements.
Okay, thank you. I guess because we can only have one at a time, I guess we need to ask the questions of each one when they're finished, or we can't really do a panel, right? Yeah, right. So, is there any questions for Ms. Pelham? No? Yes? Councilman Green?
Ms. Pelham, thank you for your taking the time to testify via Skype. It seems like what I'm hearing from both your testimony and from what I've read for other jurisdictions, this was supported by the voters by some type of citywide referenda. What was the amount of people that supported, what was the percentage of people that supported the public financing? And was there any backlash or negative response to the fact that people will be using public dollars for public financing?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Green. I would have to follow up, and we'll follow up with your staff on the exact percentages. I don't know offhand, I'm sorry, the percentage by which it passed the voters. So I don't want to misstate what that number is, but I will follow up with the committee staff after the hearing to make sure you have that information. Here in the city, I'm not aware from my conversations with staff here that there has been a backlash for the program. It's something where there has been a varied rate of participation by candidates, but San Francisco, as you probably know, perhaps very much like Philadelphia, it's a very engaged citizenry. We have a lot of candidates who run for office. And I think the sense that the staff has had over time is that the program is something that candidates have been drawn to as a way to run in city elections. As you know, the program, like others you're hearing from this morning, requires candidates to have a base of demonstrated support in their communities. The funds are matched only if they come from residents within the city. So it very much is encouraging voters to participate as funders of candidates' elections and to have those contributions leveraged. So my sense is that there's not been a backlash and that there has been a good amount of support for the program in the city. As you know, of course, anytime there's a budget issue, that's always a fair question to be asking. Interestingly, we did have one of our most recently appointed commission members who back in the time that the Ethics Commission's proposal was on the ballot, I think had a contrary view. He has changed that. He's now a member of the commission, and I think eager to support what the voters have enacted over time. But I'm not aware of any backlash that I've seen over time or that I've heard from the staff here.
Has there been an increase in the number of candidates running for office after public financing started, as well as has there been an increase in voter participation after public financing? I
was just looking at that data this morning, and I think it's a very if you look at the graph, it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. Over since 1993, when the Ethics Commission was created, fast forward to 2002, when the supervisorial program was first implemented, the voter turnout seems to be very dependent on it being a general election versus a primary. It being a busy presidential election in which the voters are motivated. So there's been a sort of a general floating of candidate participation in those big November or presidential election years, and a general tapering off in years where there's less enthusiasm, I would say, generally. But we have, I can give you the following figure that I do understand, is that other than the 2015 election we saw last year, where there were only 3 candidates, it was a one supervisorial race on the ballot, so we had 67% of candidates participating, but there were only 3 candidates participating in that specific race. So when you look historically, there's not been a board of supervisorial election where candidates have participated, more than 50% of candidates have participated in the program. So we're trying to get a handle on from candidates, what is it that makes the program most attractive? My own opinion is that our program has some challenges mechanically, that I think our program is more complicated than it needs to be. So we're going to be studying that after this election and making some recommendations to our own commission and to our own board, because as you know, the program is a voluntary program, and candidates are only going to participate if they see a benefit to them and if they see that it's going to make it helpful for them to run up for office. I think candidates who participated have conveyed that, but our goal is to ensure that we have as broad participation as possible.
You raised a point that I was going to ask you a question about challenges to your program, and you said that your program is more complicated than it needs to be. So based on that analysis of your program, what recommendations would you make, what changes would you make, and what recommendations you would make for other jurisdictions looking to do public financing?
I think that's a really important point to think about. For example, we know that independent third-party spending is something that will have an effect on candidates' agreed to spending limits. And spending limits are an important contract the voters had for establishing a program that said we want voters to hold candidates to try and hold back on their spending so that they can spend more time with voters on issues rather than on excessive fundraising. That said, third-party independent spending is a reality that we all know, and we see quite a bit of it. In our system, we have mechanics that require us to raise the spending limit for participating candidates in a way that I think creates more work for our agency and more work for candidates and is actually necessary. So we don't have a specific recommendation on how to address it yet. We've identified the issue, and we're going to be making some recommendations probably this winter for streamlining that, because the goal is to enable candidates to have funds that they can use to leverage relatively small individual donor contributions and be able to spend time talking to voters about issues that are important to their communities, and have that bucket of public money they've qualified for and demonstrated support for that enables them to have a neutral pot of money that doesn't come with any strings attached, whether real or perceived. So part of that is to make sure that candidates see the program as useful, as understanding as possible with the complexities of running for office. But that also provides accountability for the voters who are funding candidates in limited ways.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pelham. Please let record reflect Councilman O'Neill, member of the committee, is present. There's no other questions for Ms. Pelham. Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation in this. Oh, wait a minute. You have a question? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Councilman Heenan?
Sure.
Is it true it's always sunny in California?
Well, except for last week, we apparently have had the most rain since 1895 in the Bay Area in the month of October.
Well, good morning. Anyway. Good morning, and thank you for participating, especially through Skype in our hearing process here today. And my one question is, you had described, I know a lot of, some of the challenges because of the complexity of the mechanics of your system. And you had described, I think, which is true, anywhere, right, the enthusiasm of the voters, whether it's a general election, it's a governor's election or a presidential election. But have you been able to correlate the participation of candidates and voter turnout on some of the off-cycle elections?
I don't think we have an answer for that, no. I have laid over the, sort of peaks and valleys of voter participation, which if you looked at a chart, there is not a straight line. It would be difficult to look at the trajectory because it really varies depending on what seats are on the ballot and what's going on politically that year. So I would hesitate to try and draw any kind of correlation or causality between one specific element versus another. Clearly, I know that the matching funds programs that I've worked with over the years very much are designed in part to have voter turnout as strong as possible. And I don't know who's looked at those numbers to see if they have a direct correlation or not. There are other things that we've seen that the voters continue to, I think, see as a reason to support the program in terms of freeing them up from fundraising and having that neutral source of funds that helps in the governing process, right, which is a piece we don't really quantify or study so much. But there is it's a varied pattern. I think the other thing I should point out for your information as well, as our financing, our 2015 report did from last April, the city's laws have changed over the years, even within the 13 years that the program has been implemented. And so there have been a variety of different qualifying requirements, funding levels, ways in which the spending limits were lifted. And I think that makes it hard for us in our jurisdiction to try and study where those dynamics play out. So over time, that's important for us to do because we need to understand where the pinch points and the strengths of the program are, but laws that constantly change make that a bit challenging. One of the other dynamics that we have in the city here is that we have a process in 2006 that was created and established for ranked choice voting. So that is also in the middle of this 10 or 12 year period of public financing. We have a hard time looking just directly at public financing absent that dynamic as well. So there are a number of factors at play, and I think it's important for an agency like ours or yours after an election to be able to really size up from candidates and contributors what was the experience, where do they see the challenges, and where do they see improvements needed. So we'll be doing that in the coming months.
And there's no doubt, and we're keenly going to be watching and seeing. I saw the chart and I see how it fluctuates, and I guess it with all the propositions and ballot questions, it would be a little difficult, I guess, at times to really pinpoint an algorithm of the correlation. So my last question, in your paperwork here, in your submittal on your testimony, it's on the Ethics Commission. Is that where is that the department that the voters chose to have as its independent watch and enforcement arm of the campaign or public financing?
Yes, very much so. We were created to administer and enforce the city's and some state ethics laws as well, lobbying ordinance, and the campaign finance laws for the city and county of San Francisco. We're both a city and a county. But yes, so we have administration duties, we have enforcement duties. Importantly, we also audit. It's mandatory as part of our public financing program that we audit all committees that received public financing during the election so that we can ensure that they in fact disclose their activity properly and that they use their funds properly.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time, especially so early in the morning. Thank you.
Happy to. Thank you so much for your interest in welcoming us to the conversation.
Again, thank you. Thank you very much. I understand our next witness is on the phone, Wayne Barnett from Seattle. Do we have him? Maybe? Not yet? Okay.
I'm here.
You're there. Mr. Barnett.
Yes.
Welcome.
It's
Hey, thank you very much.
City Council of Philadelphia. I understand you have if you can make short comments and then have questions, particularly talking about how Seattle has taken on this program.
Yes, I'll just give you the overview if is that what you're looking for?
Yeah,
kind of an
please,
overview?
yeah, and just state your name officially for the record, please, and then proceed.
Yes, it's Wayne Barnett, and I'm the Executive Director of Seattle's Ethics and Elections Commission.
Thank you.
Last November, there was a ballot measure in the city put to the voters to enact a voucher program, a public financing program, and it passed by a 2-to-1 margin. So 65% of voters chose to enact this measure. And how it will work will be that our municipal elections are in odd-numbered years. So this January 3rd, we'll be mailing $100 in vouchers, 4 $25 vouchers, to every registered voter in the city of Seattle. And also having a mechanism for non-registered voters to apply to receive vouchers either online or through the mail. And people who have vouchers can give them to any candidate who agrees to abide by a $250 contribution limit, spending limits, and to participate in 3 debates. They'll also have to qualify for the program by submitting a number of qualifying contributions of $10 or more from City of Seattle residents. So that's in our, let me just tell you a little bit about how our system, we have a 9-member city council. We have an elected mayor and an elected city attorney. So those are, we only have 11 elective offices. In 2017, there are 2 at-large city council members up. The city attorney stands for re-election, and the mayor stands for re-election. And then in 2019 will be the 7 district council seats will be up. So, like I said, this is all new. We don't have any elections under our belt to report on, but we are working hard to get this implemented by January 3rd.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Barnett, just repeat, because it's slightly hard to hear here. You said a $250 limit, that's on what now? Just so I'm clear?
That's the contribution limit.
Contribution limit that you can take in from, a candidate can take in from other sources? Is that what you mean?
No, that's the individual contribution limit for those who are participating in the program.
Okay. Oh, for the contributor. Okay. All right.
Right.
I got you. Okay. All right. Councilman Green, did you have questions?
Yes, Mr. Barnett, thank you for taking the time to testify via phone regarding the voucher public financing system that Seattle is about to initiate. I'm curious in reference to what led you to look at a voucher system as opposed to a lump sum or matching system that you have in other jurisdictions.
I think this was purely a citizen-led initiative. I want to say, the city was not involved in sponsoring this measure at all. We'd actually put on a matching program on the ballot in November of 2014, which failed. And that's when the advocates, public financing advocates, went out and drafted this measure and put it to the voters. I will say that I think the biggest selling point for vouchers is that under a matching program, you still have to be able to make a campaign contribution for it to be matched. And I think if you're working 2 minimum wage jobs, trying to support a family, I think even a $10 campaign contribution is not high on the list of spending priorities for many working families here in Seattle. So this is a way to give anyone and everyone an opportunity to make a campaign contribution of up to $100.
Considering this is a new initiative, do you have any concerns? Because listening to your testimony and reading information, you'll be sending out vouchers to voters. Do you have any concerns in reference to the operations of that from a fraud perspective or other considerations?
The fraud perspective, that is something we are on guard for. I believe the drafters of the initiative were also keenly aware of that. Each of these vouchers will have a barcode, and we've got systems to track them. We'll be matching the signature on the vouchers against the signature in the voter rolls, as well as for those who aren't registered voters, we're going to have either a lease or some other form of identification that will be verifying the signatures on them. And any fraud in the voucher program is made a misdemeanor under the initiative. So punishable by up to a year in jail or financial penalties. So I do think there are strong disincentives for fraud.
In addition to the actual cost of dollars from the general fund for vouchers, what are the operational costs? Because it seems like in this program, as opposed to a matching or a lump sum grant program, you have a high operational cost with the vouchers.
Yes, that is very true. I think especially here in the early going, as we get the program up and running, the implementation costs are not insignificant. I forget what I was going to say.
And when you say not insignificant, can you give us like a range of what you anticipate you may spend on the operations as opposed to the money you anticipate you may spend on the actual cost of the vouchers?
Yes. Once the program is up and running in 2017, we're projecting approximately $350,000 to run the program. And I should say there is no general fund money here. This is all a property tax levy of $3 million per year for 10 years that the voters chose to impose when they enacted this measure. So all of the administration of the program, as well as the public money that goes to candidates, has to come out of that $3 million per year.
And if there is additional, let's say you have a number of candidates that decide to run based on this new initiative, what if there's not enough money? Will you just reduce the amount? I mean, how will that work out?
I believe what we do is once we see that we are going to run out of money or project that the funds are going to be insufficient, we notify all the candidates who are participating that to get in their vouchers, and we will pay out on a prorated basis whatever funds are available.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Barnett, just one other quick question. Did you need any enabling legislation from the state to do this, or is this something you were able to do on your own?
We did about 10 years ago. We got permission from the state legislature to enact local public financing.
Okay.
The string that came attached with that was that the city could not do it legislatively, but had to be done by a vote of the people.
I see. It had to be done by referendum. Okay.
Right.
All right. Gotcha. Any other questions? Seeing none, Mr. Barnett, thank you for checking in. We appreciate it very much. And
Well, you're very welcome. Good luck with your efforts.
okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.
I understand the last person of this group is joining us on Skype now, Amy Loprest. There's no video. So you're with us, Ms. Loprest?
Hear me?
We can now, I believe.
Okay.
Let me make sure everybody else in here that needs to can hear. Okay, it looks like they will. So if you could, I understand you've been following us online here, so you kind of know where the discussions are going. So if you could make any kind of statement, brief statement, and then we'll have questions. We appreciate it. If you could just officially state your name for the record, and then you could proceed.
I'm Amy Lopez, the Executive Director of New York City's Campaign Finance Board. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today and talk about our program, which has been in effect since 1988, which is much longer than many of the other programs you've been talking to. I have been following along, and so I'm just going to, you have my written testimony. I'm just going to give you some highlights of the program that fit into some of the questions that you've been asking the other panelists this morning. I want to point out one thing that is interesting about the way our board is constructed is that we are a nonpartisan as opposed to a bipartisan board. It's a 5-member board. The mayor and the speaker of the city council each appoint 2 members that have to be, cannot be of the same political party, and the mayor appoints the chair after consultation with the speaker. Our program covers 59 offices in New York City, 3 citywide offices, mayor, controller, and public advocate, 5 borough presidents, and 51 city council members. And just as a perspective, because it'll be relevant when we talk about the funding, New York City is home to about 8.2 million people and has an annual budget of about $67 billion for the whole city. As you heard from several other speakers, New York City's program is a multiple dollar match, and the goals of our program are to increase the role of small dollar contributions in city elections and just decrease the perception and possibility of corruption associated with large contributions. So that being said, our program matches the first $175 contributed by New York City residents with public funds at a rate of $6 to $1, which means that a $25 contribution from a New Yorker is worth $175 to the candidate. Like many of these other programs, we have a fundraising threshold to demonstrate that you are a significant candidate. For example, for city council, you have to raise $5,000 in matching contributions and collect 75 contributions of $10 or more from residents of your city council district. Candidates also have to be on the ballot and have opposed on the ballot and have to be in compliance with our law. The participants agree to spending limits, and they're also, and our public funds are capped at 55% of that spending limit. So for example, the spending limit for city council in 2017, which is our next municipal elections, will be $182,000 each for the primary and general election, and the maximum public funds that they can receive is $100,100 for the primary and again for the general election. We have been incredibly successful in having a very high participating rate. In the 2013 elections, 92% of candidates in the primary and more than 72% of candidates in the general election were participating in the program. We also have mandates to inform and educate voters, and we have a strong disclosure system. All of the financial disclosure submitted by candidates and independent spenders is available online in a fully searchable database on our website. So I just want to talk a little bit about the results because we have been very successful in meeting our goal of encouraging small donors. More than 90% of the funds raised by city council candidates in the 2013 elections came from individual contributors. Only 7% came from PACs, unions, and special interests. This is a big contrast to the New York State legislature, where in 2012, state candidates relied on those sources for more than 2/3 of their total funding. We also have broad participation across the entire city. A report by the Campaign Finance Institute in 2012 showed that fully 90% of New York City census blocks had someone in it that gave $175 or less. And then one of the council members asked a question earlier about voter turnout. We have been engaging a study to look at that, and in our research showed that in the 2013 Democratic primary, you were 3 times more likely to vote if you made a contribution to a candidate than if you had not given a contribution. So while voter turnout is still fairly depressingly low in New York City, we're very hopeful that the encouragement of contributors, small dollar contributors, will encourage voter participation. As Ms. Pelham from San Francisco stated, we consider auditing a very important part of making our program robust. So candidates are audited before, during, and after the election to ensure that funds are paid appropriately on the money. The money paid is on real contributions, and that the money that we provide in public funds is actually spent appropriately. Now, I guess, onto the question that you have asked most of the panelists is, our program is entirely, and our administrative budget is entirely funded by the city's general funds. We have independent budget authority, so that effectively since 1998, the board has been able to set its own budget every single year to avoid interference with that budget. Since the beginning of the program in 1988, we've paid out about nearly $145 million in public funds. In the most recent election in 2013, we paid out $38 million to over 200 candidates. I think that, we have had a market success. I think another panelist mentioned that one of the market reasons we've had such great success is that the city charter requires us after every city election to review the program and make recommendations for changes, which has kept the program robust over the nearly 30 years that we've been in existence. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me just, on your last points on the financing. Now, you said that your board sets its own budget. Now, does that mean that whatever your budget is has to be approved?
The way it works is this was from charter referendum in 1997. Mm-hmm. The board submits its budget to the mayor, and the mayor has to include our budget unchanged in his or her executive budget. That budget, of course, then is voted on by the city council. Okay. Effectively, that has not been changed in the almost 15 years that process has been in effect.
So it goes into the part of the mayor's budget, which is then deliberated by the city council. Okay.
Yes.
In order to raise the money for the program, has there been any specific increases, taxes, fees, anything like that, particularly geared towards funding the program?
No, I mean, the initial charter referendum and the initial legislation passed by the city council, which happened at basically the same time. The law was passed in February of 1988 by the city council, and then adopted by the voters in a charter referendum in the fall of that year, that the money comes from the general fund, and there really has been no special appropriations over the course of the year. Now, of course, our budget, while it sounds like a large number, is a relatively small portion of the city's overall budget.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand that. And has there been any, over this time, you say it's been successful and well received, concern about the money that's spent on this could be spent on something else? From the public, I'm talking about public
There has been some public, I guess when the program originally had a matching rate of $1 to $1 for contributions up to 1,000 when it was passed initially, and in the 2000, for the 2001 elections, there was a proposal to change the matching rate to $4 for $1 up to 250, and there was a lot of discussion at that time about whether that increase would, be, break the bank, be a big problem for the city's budget. As a matter of fact, the board was sued, but that was all resolved by the city council, and since then we really have had there has been no real outcry public about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Chairman Greenlee. Thank you for your testimony and your willingness to be involved in this conversation. Considering New York City has had public financing for a number of years, have there been any ideas and thoughts in changing the system to make it a different system? Seattle is implementing a voucher system. Other jurisdictions have other different types of systems. Has there been any thought in making a change to the system?
We started as a matching fund system, and I think that let me go back. First, the program has evolved very much over the past, almost 30 years because we make recommendations after each election to make changes. One of the changes, a very important one, was the change to the multiple dollar match that I described that happened for the 2001 elections. That really improve the program especially for city council candidates. $1,000 is a fairly large amount of money to collect for a city council campaign, and so moving to a multiple match has really increased the amount of public funds available for city council candidates. I think the reason we think that a multiple match program works best is that it encourages small dollar contributions. It encourages candidates to seek those contributions from people who are actually their constituents. A dollar contribution will be worth, is worth $6 in matching funds, worth a total of $7. You can get those small contributions and still fund your election. There is a mix of public and private money in the campaign, so it is contributors still have skin in the game, and they are involved. And as our research showed in 2013, when you make a contribution, even a small contribution, you're almost 3 times more likely to vote. So we think that encouraging the continuation of getting contribution is a better process.
Have there been any other ideas in reference to how you fund public financing? From my understanding, it's coming from a general fund, but have there been other ideas of how to fund your public financing system?
No, we actually really never had any real problems with the general fund being the source of the money. So there hasn't been much discussion about any other sources.
And then also, I guess my question is, what trends have you seen, considering you've had public financing for about 15 years? Has there been an increase in the number of candidates running? Also, has there been an increase in voter participation as a result of the public financing system?
Well, we actually track the competitiveness of the elections, and there's certainly, if you compare New York City elections to, I guess the most relevant comparison is elections in New York State, which does not have a public financing program. New York City elections are routinely much more competitive, both at the primary and general election level, than New York State elections for legislative offices. I'm blanking on what your second question was. It's about voter participation. As I said, we did do this study, and it did show that contributors are much more likely to vote. As I also said, the voter turnout is still not great in New York City, and we actually have a separate mandate, aside from running the public matching funds program, to encourage and engage voters. And so we are, my agency in that separate mandate is very much engaged in trying to encourage increased voter participation.
And when you say more competitive, how are you defining competitive? Is that number of candidates?
We do. We have a number of candidates, and also whether or not they're actually competitive races. So if you look at our 2013 post-election report, there's an analysis of how how competitive the races were in 2013, separated by whether they were open seats where there was no incumbent, when there was an incumbent, but there is a lot of data in that report, and I can direct your staff to where to look for that in that report.
And so what I'm hearing, you're saying there were less non-competitive races. I mean, less uncontested races.
There are fewer uncontested races completely, and there were actually races where it's actually competitive, where there was, that the results were fairly competitive and close, not overwhelming victory.
Okay. And then also in reference to turnout, the question I had earlier, was in reference to the time you've had public financing. Has that increased turnout? And you made reference to the point that when people make individual small donations, they're more likely to participate. But you still said that turnout still has not been the best. Have there been other factors in reference to the cycle of elections that have impacted turnout? When we were talking to representatives from San Francisco, they said that turnout is also dependent upon the cycle and other dynamics like a presidential election or other type of elections that have may gather a large attention span. Has that also been the case in your elections post public financing?
Yes, I mean, I think that I couldn't, off the top of my head, tell you the trend from before public financing, to current. Also, New York City's entire governmental structure changed from 1988 to 1989 as a result of a Supreme Court decision. So it's hard to compare. The City Council was completely reorganized, so that it's hard to tell, earlier versus later trends. But I will say this, that our elections are held in, non-presidential years, non-state-wide election years. They're held in odd numbers, so 2013, 2017, and I think that does affect voter turnout. As members of a legislative body on the city level, that voters' attention is often, they don't understand how important the work of municipal elected bodies is to their daily life, and that's one of the things that we are working on to increase voter turnout. In presidential election years, there's lots of media attention, lots of voter, not great voter turnout, but a lot better. But we are really turning our attention to try and encourage, in particular young people to understand the importance of municipal government and the importance of their vote in those municipal elections.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Heenan?
Good morning, and thank you for participating in our hearing today. And we appreciate your knowledge and experience that we're able to discuss publicly here. I have a couple questions for you. So typically the public financing sits within the Ethics Commission. Is that correct? In your case with New York?
New York has a separate campaign finance board that our main responsibility is regulating campaign finances. As I said, we do some voter education and engagement. We run a debate program. We produce the citywide voter guide. But there is a separate conflict of interest board that handles what are traditionally, city ethics issues, conflicts between appointed city employees and elected officials, but we're a separately independent board that deals with just campaign finance.
Okay, and is there a separate, assuming that, you said it's separate, so is there a separate budget? I know you had mentioned that the board sets a budget or determines a budget for each year, for each fiscal year with the general fund. Is that separate and apart from the Ethics Commission, or is that independently budgeted?
Yeah, it's separate. The city has what is called the city's conflict of interest board, and they have their own separate budget and staff. We're the campaign finance board, and we have the independent budget authority and set our own budget. The conflict of interest board does not.
Okay. On average, what is your yearly budget for public financing? And I think I read somewhere, I don't know if it's an average, but 67 million, is that correct?
Well, so we, obviously the budget goes up for the public funds, the actual money that's going to go and pay out in public funds. It varies by year. This fiscal year, when we only anticipated some special elections and some post-election spending payments, we only budgeted $1 million for public funds. But in an election year, as I said, we paid out $38 million in public funds in 2013. The largest year that we've ever paid out funds is the 2001 elections, where we paid out $42 million in public funds. As far as the administrative budget, not relate to the public fund, our budget for this year is about $14 million, and that we do all of our own software development. We have a candidate services unit. We have a legal unit that does enforcement. We have an audit unit that does the auditing. In addition, we have people who do voter engagement and education on the staff.
And that's for all 5 boroughs?
Yes.
And how many staff?
We have currently a full-time staff of 96 and seasonal staff, which may be a creature of New York City government, which are positions that are for 18 months only, that we use to staff up in anticipation of election years, and that we have 13 seasonal staff members.
13?
Yes.
Oh, that's not much. We have part-time staff here, to help out with the election cycles. You need it. How have you worked out you mentioned, about, the conflicts, part of the Ethics Commission and the public financing. How do you work out the duplicity with what your independent board does and the Bureau of Elections?
Okay, so to make it even more complicated, there's the Board of Elections is a completely separate entity from the two that I already mentioned, the Campaign Finance Board and the Conflict of Interest Board. The Board of Elections runs the elections, and so the City Board of Elections runs the elections, the State Board of Elections, maintains the voter rolls. There is public disclosure of your finances on the state level in New York State. So the candidates for city office are required to make their disclosure to our office in the city and to the State Board of Elections. We produce software that we give to all candidates for free that does all of their software disclosure for both our program and for the State Board of Elections.
Okay.
So they can do it simultaneously. They only have to enter the information once.
Right. Well, that certainly helps on time and resources. And thank God for technology. So I mean, you would have to have you have a pretty good relationship, I would assume, with the Bureau of Elections, both in the city and the state.
Yes.
This way, the effectiveness of and the integrity of your independent department is more efficient.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lopez.
Thank you for allowing me to testify by Skype instead of coming.
Okay, no,
Thank you
that's
very
fine.
much.
That's fine. Although you had a much shorter distance than the folks from
I
Seattle
know,
and San
I
Francisco,
appreciate it.
you know?
I think that was against your normal rules, but thank you very much for allowing me to.
And I don't know if you were listening at the very beginning of the hearing, so did you miss Councilman Green's swipe at the Yankees? I don't know if you heard that.
No, I missed
Okay,
that.
well then I won't rat him out. Never mind.
For a
Never
second.
mind. Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, that completes this panel. Now back in person, we have some folks. Ms. Marconi, please call, or at least what we have are the last two witnesses.
Michael Cook and David Thornburg.
Is there anyone else other than these two individuals? Okay, very good. Thank you. These will be our last two witnesses. Ms. Cook, I know we have your written testimony. Do you have anything, Mr. Thornburg? Do you have any, or you just will go make comments?
I do.
Okay. And again, written testimony will be made part of the record. You've heard me say this a few times, so if you could summarize, and then we probably will have some questions. Please, Mr. Cook, why don't you start?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael Cook. I'm the Executive Director for the the Director of Enforcement for the Philadelphia Board of Ethics. I'm joined by our Deputy Executive Director, Netta Masser, today. And I thank the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify in this resolution, and council and the committee for taking up this issue, in particular, council members Green and Heenan. You have my testimony, so I won't repeat it, certainly. Simply hit a couple of the highlights and then answer whatever questions that you may have. You heard Ms. Loprest discuss the approach in New York, and I think my intention with my testimony today is to focus on what the costs would be for Philadelphia if it were to adopt a system of public financing and was administered by the Board of Ethics, to give some sort of ballpark number on the amount of funding, the dollar amount for the administrative end of administering such a program. So with that in mind, I should say at the outset that, of course, this is all very preliminary. There is no legislation introduced at this point, so we don't know what specific type of public financing system we would be looking at, and that could certainly change the requirements for administration. But looking at other jurisdictions like New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco, Seattle, I think we're able to draw some lessons that will allow us to get some ballpark numbers. With New York, as Ms. Loprest indicated, of course, they're on a different level of magnitude than pretty much any other city in the country in terms of their budget numbers. But I do think it's important to keep in mind what she was pointing out in terms of their approach with staffing. They put a very high premium on campaign and candidate assistance. They assign a particular staff member to each campaign so candidates can figure out how to navigate the program. Outreach and education, helping them comply with the system so that candidates can get the money that they're entitled to is a big part of what they do. And then also the very careful review and audit of all of the requests for matching funds in order to ensure that public money is being spent on what it was supposed to be spent on is another big piece. And then the software end of it, the technology piece, which really makes all this happen in a more efficient way. They have developed specific software, and they have people who maintain that and help the candidates and campaigns navigate the software program. So those, I think, are similar areas to what we would be looking at in Philadelphia if the board was tasked with the job of administering a public financing system. In terms of specific dollar amounts, I think Los Angeles and San Francisco make good comparisons for Philadelphia in terms of the size of those cities, but more particularly in the size of their government and the amount of candidates who could potentially be participating. For example, in Los Angeles, their city government has a total of 18 elected positions that are eligible for public office, and in San Francisco, 12 elected positions are eligible for public financing for their elections. Comparison in Philadelphia, if every city office was to participate in the program, that would be 24 elected offices that would be eligible to participate. I note, though, that in both Los Angeles and San Francisco, they stagger their council terms so that the entire city council is not up for re-election at the same time, which spreads out the burden somewhat in terms of administering the program, so that in Los Angeles, in a particular election year, they would have at most 10 elections going on that would be eligible for public funding. In San Francisco, it would be 7 elections in a given year that would be eligible for public funding at the most. In contrast, in Philadelphia, if you look at 2015 or 2019, where you have all but the DA and controller going, we would be looking at 22 races to administer where there would be eligibility for public finance. Of course, in the district attorney and controller years, it would just be 2 races. Looking at some specific numbers, the Los Angeles Ethics Commission has an annual budget of approximately $3 million and a staff of 25. They administer the city's ethics laws like conflict of interest and so on, as well as the lobbying law, campaign finance, and public financing. The same is true in San Francisco in terms of the responsibilities of their ethics commission, but they have a staff of 22 and an annual budget of $3.3 million. I think for both agencies, when they have an active election, they have 4 to 5 of their full-time staff members who are working on that pretty much nonstop as their primary responsibility. Los Angeles also uses temporary seasonal workers to help pick up the slack in terms of processing the claims for matching funds that come in. And that's certainly something to consider in Philadelphia if the system were to be adopted as a way to manage the natural up and down of the election cycles. So based on looking at these other jurisdictions, we can estimate, again, it's all rough at this point because we don't know particularly what kind of program we'd have, but our estimate would be for the board to administer a public financing system, an additional $1 million to $1.5 million per year in the annual budget to cover staffing and administration costs for that program. And that majority of that funding would go to approximately 6 new staff positions, again, just ballparking, who would probably be supplemented by temporary seasonal staff in the busiest election times. No doubt the permanent staff, when they weren't engaged in administering the public financing program, would help assist with other aspects of the board work. I think, given the nature of what those folks would be doing with public financing, the area of the current work where they would be most useful would be in the education, outreach, and compliance sections as a way to blend in with what they would be doing to assist candidates and campaigns in complying or participating in the public financing program. I should note something that I believe Councilman Green alluded to earlier, is that in addition to new administrative costs when such a program was up and running on a regular basis, there would be startup costs, no doubt. In particular, I think, in the area of software development, in order to have a system that would allow candidates to effectively process their requests for matching funds. I know Seattle recently just signed a contract and is beginning to implement a new software program for their new public financing system, and I believe for them it cost about $300,000 to develop the program, and such software programs, of course, have ongoing maintenance costs, which would need to be covered out of the annual budget. So in summary, I would say that, again, just as rough estimates at this point, on an annual basis, when a program is fully operational and fully staffed, for the board to administer it, it would be an additional $1 million to $1.5 million annually, and then there would be some startup costs, perhaps around $300,000 to $400,000, maybe a little more, to develop and implement the software programs. I would note, going on the assumption here, of course, that the board would be tasked with administering this program if it was to put into place. That is, of course, it depends on the approach that council wants to take on it. I would note certainly that the board is up for the task and a natural fit for it if that's what council decided to do, given that we already administer the campaign finance law, and that would create a number of efficiencies there in terms of the coverage of the two programs. So with that, I'll conclude my summary of my testimony, and very happy to take whatever questions you may have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Let's hear from Mr. Thornburg, and then we'll have the questions. Okay? Sir?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a short note of explanation. I don't have prepared testimony for this. I'm afraid you've caught us up to our eyeballs in responding to election fraud charges and all of that sort of stuff. So,
real or imagined?
What's that?
Real or imagined?
Imagined.
Okay.
I do want to just explain what I did hand out. This was actually a proposal prepared by 2 Penn law students in response to a policy competition that former Mayor Nutter conducted about a year ago. That was their take on what a public financing proposal would look like here in the city of Philadelphia. So we have no ownership or endorsement of that. We did advise them. I think the Board of Ethics did as well. But I thought because that was specific to this question, I just wanted to share that with you. I do have some commentary on the general topic and appreciate the invitation to engage in this in a preliminary fashion. First thing I'd say is I think I commend you for asking this question at this time. I think after we clear this this election on November 8th, we need to all redouble our efforts to think about how to make democracy work better, really, in this city and a municipal level. The histrionics and the circus-like atmosphere of this presidential campaign is like no other, and the money involved is extraordinary. I think the number was noted earlier that the presidential campaigns will spend about $6 billion. I read this morning that our U.S. Senate campaign will be the most expensive in U.S. history at about $140 million and climbing. And I think, you know, we have known for some time that people in this country are very disillusioned about the role of money in politics, and that's inordinately influenced by presidential and national politics. But you, as public servants at the local level, have to suffer the suspicions that comes with that. So we all have the job ahead of us of rebuilding this process from the ground up. Also noting that while it looks like there will be fairly robust turnout in this presidential year, not to forecast in a negative fashion, but it's quite likely we'll see a shadow of that turnout next year, and that's not good for us, and I think you would agree with that. So there's a lot of work to be done to knit this tattered fabric back together. I just wanted to make a comment about our past efforts and I think successes in solving some of these problems, and I note that Councilman Green's comments earlier that we're trying to strike a balance between a lot of competing objectives, and that's a wise comment. But you know, Committee of 70 was very involved, and as was Mayor Nutter and then Councilman Kenny in proposing and securing campaign finance limits, the Independent Board of Ethics, and severing the ties, I think, relatively effectively between contributions and city contracts. Also note the important role of the Inspector General and the officer, the Chief Integrity Officer, which, to his credit, Mayor Kenny has upheld. So that package put together, I think, has made quite a difference, a positive difference, in the city of Philadelphia's campaign and election climate, and has gone to some measure in restoring people's sense of integrity in the process. And we have commended, I testified last week in front of a state Senate policy committee and suggested that as unlikely as it seems to folks in Harrisburg, that maybe learning a little lesson from how we made those changes here in Philadelphia would do them well. So it's important to recognize the steps that we have taken to date. Having said that, I think this presidential election has magnified in sometimes an ugly way the loss of trust that people have in government and in your work, and I find that distressing. And again, coming back to this question of campaign finance is an important step in trying to rebuild that. Just to note, this summer we worked with a group at Temple called Be Heard Philly, which is building a survey panel, a cross-section of Philadelphians. I think the city of Philadelphia has enlisted them to take some surveys, and we asked the panel of citizens their opinions on trust in government at various levels: federal government, state government, and local level. And by and large, they said that they only trust government about half the time, and that was fairly consistent: federal, state, local. We asked them about Mayor Kenny, Governor Wolf, the presidential candidates, but that was a number that came back as kind of a rough average. And there's no benchmark comparison to that, but nor would we want or expect that number to be 100%. You know, this this country was founded on a healthy suspicion, I think, of government. But having said that, half the time seems a little low and not exactly where we ought to be. So again, further impetus for visiting this question. I talked about, made reference to Councilman Green's notion of the balance that we're trying to strike here, and just trying to think through some of those. And this also reflects some of Councilman Jones' comments. We want the process of running for office to operate on a fairly level playing field. We don't want it to be the province just of people who can write themselves big checks. We don't want the candidates to be inordinately influenced by so-called special interests and the big checks of special interests. We want there to be sufficient competition, both within particular offices and ideally, in our view, between parties and different approaches to this process, so that people have real choices. We want candidates to have cleared some threshold of demonstrated appeal. We want them to be out speaking to a broad cross-section of people and encouraging not just their vote, but their financial support. While we want competition and an open process, I think we also want to give folks, once elected, the chance to learn how to do the job and become a skillful legislator or executive branch official. And finally, we want a clear sense of accountability in the process, and I think that comes in the transparency and the timeliness of campaign reporting. And I think we have further work to do there, reporting requirements that surface contributions only after the fact or with not enough time to absorb them really don't serve the process well. So that's my quick review of the challenge at hand, some of the successes that we've had. We have not arrived at, and again, appreciate your inviting us into this conversation early, we have not arrived at sort of a definitive conclusion on the merits of either public financing in general, or, the devil is always in the details, a proposal in specific. I guess I would close by saying it's critically important that we try to keep ahead of us the problem that we think we're trying to solve, because I rattled off about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different objectives that we could be trying to solve through public financing, again, we need to keep in front of us exactly what is the most pressing challenge or problem that we have in front of us that we think that thing solves. One other thing I meant to mention, the story of money in politics ever since Citizens United, as we all know, has been outside money flowing into the campaign process. I think that in the Senate race, $140 million, I think about 2/3 or 3/4 of that was super PAC money. And we share a lot of folks' concern that we've kind of created a monster there that leaves us with a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability that is harmful to the process. So I throw all that out, and I hope that's helpful in furthering the discussion. And again, appreciate the chance to talk with you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thornburg. Thank you both. Just a couple questions. I know Councilman Green had some questions. Mr. Cook, you said on your, approximate amount that it would take to administer the programs, $1 million to 1.5, right? That's just administering. We're not talking about what the city might have to put out funding-wise or whatever, correct?
That is correct. That would not include the matching funds.
And I know you both said that you're not taking a specific position on the issue, but let me just throw something out. And I guess this is more of a comment, and if you want to comment yourselves, that's fine. And it gets back to, the money that would be spent on this program, either administering it, giving out in whatever way we're giving it out. Every year we go through, and you probably heard me talk about this right in the beginning, a very tough budget process. And oftentimes it's what we can pay for and what we can't pay for. And a lot of times what we can't pay for, we wish we could, right? And let me give you just a quick example of something that a lot of us have worked on, an issue over the years, is funding for domestic violence victim programs. I put in this year a request to have $300,000 put in the budget. Through the various negotiations, we had down and finally $100,000 was put in. Obviously, I thought, and the advocates thought, that $300,000, was a better figure. But that's the way the budget process works. We had it. So, and I think there's a lot of different programs like that. There's just something in the paper, publicized the other day about lead-based paint removal. That kind of thing. Obviously, that costs money, and we could go through a myriad of things that cost money. So I guess my just thought, and if you have anything to say, and I'm not downing this program or any kind of public financing program, but like, what do I say to those domestic violence advocates to say, well, we don't have all that money you need to put in, but we're going to help finance our campaigns. That's the concern, the main concern I have about this program, because everything costs money. And what are our priorities? Again, all supporting good government and fair elections and all that kind of, and the downgrading as much as possible the influence of money in elections, but still, there's a lot of other things we have to spend money on, and didn't even mention schools, which is kind of a big issue in the city of Philadelphia. So anyway, I don't know if you have a comment, or that's just my...
I would just offer a comment. I think you're asking the question that I closed with, which is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how does that rank? Budgeting process is nothing more than trying to sort out priorities.
Right.
I wasn't at the Committee of 70 at the time. 10 years ago, when the ethics and campaign finance limits and so forth, I suspect this came up as a possibility. It feels like it would have been more powerful if this had come up at that time before we instituted the things that I talked about earlier. But that's an important question to keep asking. What exactly is the problem, and what kind of leverage would this proposal achieve towards solving that problem, and how's it compared to everything else?
What the priorities, yeah. And again, I'm not saying I have an answer to that either, but it's something that certainly concerns me when we talk about putting what I would say is fair to say at least a fairly expensive additional cost in our budget each year. So now I heard from the folks in the other cities, it seems like people have said that's okay. Whether Philadelphia will feel that way, I don't know. I guess that to be determined if we go forward. Enough of a speech.
If I might
I'm sorry.
add another comment, and I don't know this. It struck me that New York has had its system in place, I think, since the early 70s.
Like 80s or something like that. 88, I think it was, yes.
Okay.
It's a long time.
But there aren't that many examples of these kinds of proposals. And Seattle's is brand new, as you know, so it might be worth asking a question as to why that's so, why there's so few of them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Councilman Heenan, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilman, for yielding time, because I have to take off up to the district for some constituent business. But thank you guys for being here. And it's amazing when you hear, first of all right, we're actually talking about this publicly, all right, in a city that's, we're so used to doing things the way they have been. And I think when it comes to regulations and laws and different, with the ethics and measure, I mean, we're evolving, all right? So we're trying to, the piecemeal things along the way and adjust and make government much more efficient and transparent. And I think we're doing that here with this hearing, all right? Because, a lot of good policies have come out of public hearings, and this may be one of them. I was a little surprised that New York, has had public financings, for like 28 years or whatever, almost 30 years. So I mean that was a bit of a surprise. And, with their longevity and the amount of people and the amount of candidates and the amount of, in their budget, I mean, I think what they said, they had a $34 billion budget, which was astonishing a report to me, that they change every year. They reevaluate and they come back and they see what works, what doesn't work, and what tweaks and what doesn't. And I think our biggest challenge here is funding. And it's in Seattle, San Francisco, in Arizona, we're talking about funding. Whether it's the grants or vouchers or tax credits, it's all about the funding. And one thing I've learned in a short period of time here is every good idea has a cost. But where there's a will, there's a way. And I think by talking about it and educating people on what this actually is, right, because it's a little complicated. Even San Francisco said they had a very complicated system. That they're constantly monitoring and adjusting along the way. So we're gonna take back a lot of the information that has been provided to us with our testimony, and David, you did quite well for not having written testimony. So for your participating in today, as far as the ethics board goes, and you said that there is an interest in, if council chooses to head in this direction, that you would be up for the challenge. I guess there would be a separation, just like New York has in ethics. You have the separation for public financing. Would that be a charter change?
I don't think it would be necessary to create a sort of new department or new entity or some sort of charter-based or even legislatively based separation in the existing Board of Ethics in order to have that as part of the package. I think as a practical matter, yes, that within the agency itself, there would be, like a unit that would be devoted to working as its first priority, and probably for the vast amount of its time, on administering the public financing system. Because even outside of the election season, where things are very busy, there's the upkeep and education and outreach and preparation for that, or following the elections season, the sort of end of or post-election review and caretaking that has to go on. And also, as you pointed out, I think that we feel as an agency, we always try to, as much as possible, always examine what we've done, how can we improve, make changes to make the program better. So yes, I think that within the agency, there would be a separate unit that would be devoted to working on the public financing system. And when they had those moments that they weren't totally consumed with that, then they probably would try to support other aspects of the agency's work, but their prime concern and most of their time would be spent on the public financing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to provide some background, some historical context, then Councilman Nutter was a prime sponsor of the campaign finance legislation and the political and the contract legislation that we have in effect today. Councilman Tasker was also a very prime sponsor of that legislation, and in my previous role, I served a lot of time helping to draft that legislation and working on that about 10 years ago. And as an outgrowth of those hearings and that legislation, that's what led to Councilman Tasco's resolution regarding public financing of campaigns, because it was a continuation of that conversation that we had back in 2006. And at that time, the issue that Councilman Greenlee raised was also the big issue of that conversation. How do you balance between the various interests when you talk about issues like you talked about in reference to domestic violence, because that was an issue that Councilman Tasker was very active, engaged in domestic violence. How do you balance all these competing interests and thinking about how we can engage the citizenry in a better way, and how we try to reduce the cost of campaigning and running for office here in the city of Philadelphia. So I just want to provide that backdrop. In addition, I want to just publicly thank the staff from the Ethics Board, both Mike, Maya, and Netta. I've worked with you for a number of years on a lot of different issues that I just stated a few moments ago. I still feel, although we're balancing a lot of different issues and interests from a funding perspective, I still feel that your office is not funded at the level that it should be, considering all the things that you need to do is a challenge. But I do want to raise a couple points in reference to the testimony that's been provided, both from you, Mr. Cook, and you as well, Mr. Thornburg. So from the perspective of funding, and you've heard some testimony from Seattle, and you've looked in New York and other cities. Do you have any thoughts on, I know that how we actually get to the funding is one issue, but if that was not an issue, the voucher concept versus matching versus lump sum, any thoughts or perspectives on those different ideas?
I would say that just from my observations in looking at these various programs, the matching fund programs seem to work very well as a balance of the various issues. The voucher fund program, of course, is new, and so that's kind of the leap in the dark. From talking with Wayne Barnett, though, he made the point that there's really not any sort of cost savings for the administration. If anything, it might be more using a voucher system. And of course, as you identified, there's the concern about dealing with fraud and just the sort of physical integrity and handling of the vouchers that I think raise a lot of questions. That it's one thing to ponder in the abstract, but if the city is going to develop a program, it's a big leap to go with something that hasn't been done before. I would say that something I observed that was interesting in terms of funding, not so much as a source of funds, but as a mechanism for handling funding of these programs, is unlike New York, both Los Angeles and San Francisco use a sort of a trust fund system, where they have a separate fund that's set up, and it gets an appropriation of some amount of money, say $5 million, and that they spend down from that fund as they need to in order to provide for their matching funds. I don't believe in San Francisco, at any rate, their administrative costs don't come out of that source, although I suppose they could. But what it means is that there is a protection from the natural fluctuations that you see in these elections that are publicly financed in terms of how many people are going to participate. And so you sort of, a way to pay as you go, as opposed to the city having to appropriate every year and guess and project on what they think the full amount would be. And I think that results in it kind of cushioning the cost to the city. As needed, they top off the general fund, but they're not seeing, a general fund appropriation every year of $8 million or whatever the case may be. And so I just put that out there as something I know that wouldn't solve, obviously, what Councilman Greenlee has raised as the real compelling question here, this question of priorities. And the city has a lot of things it needs to spend money on. But if the city did decide, if council did decide that it wanted to invest in public financing, that this is a way to sort of cushion and control for some of that yearly fluctuation and appropriation.
Yeah, when you made reference to the trust fund concept, it reminded me some of my earlier comments in reference to how we can look at different ways of funding it, getting small dollar donations. I made reference to online donations and having that go through, as opposed to the city, through some type of entity like a trust fund. The question of whether some foundations may be interested, who are looking and trying to change civic atmosphere. Earlier this year, I had hearings regarding social impact bonds. So there could be some creative ideas as one way to seed fund this concept. And then also, Mr. Thornburg, thank you for this RIPE proposal that you presented. Looking at the title of this proposal that the two Penn Law students put together, which they call Restoring Integrity to Philadelphia's Elections, or RIPE. It actually was very, very detailed concept in reference to how you would do a public financing system here in the city of Philadelphia. In particular, they talked about two areas, increasing lobbying fees and Board of Ethics fines to offset about 5% of the annual costs of a public financing system here in the city of Philadelphia, and looking at allocating 0.1% of the general fund for an estimate cost of about $5.7 million annually, which they equate to about a little less than $4 per resident to fund this type of public financing system. So I wanted to thank you for providing this information, and to the extent if you had their contact information, and there's some way we could possibly follow up with them, because I think they clearly spent some time really thinking this through, how a public financing system would occur here in the city of Philadelphia, and made a comparison between various council races in New York and other type of races, and compare that to Philadelphia. So this is a good template to kind of continue the conversation. And then I would just close, because I think what the chair said in reference to how we allocate resources is so important, and looking at what happened in other cities. In other cities, they had some type of either referenda or charter change to get public buy-in for whether this is something that people may be interested in. And I would think before we can really get into the details of moving forward with some type of concept, we will probably need that similar type of process here by some type of charter change legislation.
Thank you, Councilman. And no other questions? Thank you both very much. Thank you for hanging in there. I know it was a long morning there.
Thank you.
Okay. No one else here to testify? Seeing that, just adjourn to the call. Okay. And first of all, I want to recognize Councilman Green and his staff, Councilman Heenan and their staff, for the work they did on this. I know this is a discussion that will keep going for a little while. So with that, the hearing on Resolution 160851 by the Committee on Law and Government will stand in recess to the call of the chair. Thank you.